Hello everyone and welcome to My Fantasy Journey, a channel dedicated to opinion-based fantasy book reviews. Today I'm going to be talking about a book that is kind of like one of those rare finds. It's a book that a lot of people don't know about. Of course there are people who know about it. So if you're into the fantasy genre, maybe you've heard about this book or maybe you've come across it. But it's not a book that, that rings the bell quickly. It's not a classic, it's not a bestseller or anything of the sort. So it's one of those more like rare finds that you see yourself saying like, oh, this sounds interesting, and then when you read it, you're like, oh, I'm glad I found out about this book. So it's one of those. Yeah, and I was very interested in reading this book. So yeah, I was like very excited and very intrigued with it. So yeah, that being said, the book that I'm going to be discussing today is Somerset Castle Auburn by Sharon Shinn. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of what this book is about, just a very brief, very general kind of like summary. So this book is about this village girl who is the illegitimate daughter of this lord. So I think you know what that means. So yeah, she lives in a village with her grandmother, and she practices like witchcraft and herbology in that village. But every summer, being the daughter of this lord, every summer she spends it at a castle, of course, at a castle in Auburn, so Castle Auburn, where she has friends and family, and she has like the best time there. So for her, summers are a special time of the year, and she loves the castle, and she has so many fond memories of the place and all those good things. But then, there comes a summer when things start to get darker, and there's something that's going on in the castle, some bad things that might put her and her loved ones at risk. So she has to deal with all that. But that's all I'm going to say about this book, because I don't want to spoil anything. So that's just a very super general kind of like summary of a little bit of what this book is about. So yeah, like I said, I was very intrigued with this book the first time I saw it. I had high expectations, to be honest. And I know I've said that from a lot of like books, but then again, when you buy a book, you obviously have like expectations from it. Some you have like lesser expectations, some you come in like not knowing anything, which has happened to me. But there are books that you find about and you're just like, oh, that sounds really good, I want to read that. So yeah, that was kind of like one of those books which I found out about it, and I was like, oh, that sounds, because I like kind of like those more rare fantasies that that are like kind of like harder to find. A lot of people don't know about it. I love reading those. So this for me was one of that, and well, I did enjoy it quite a lot. I was never bored with this book. I did find it weak in some aspects, and I did find it kind of disappointing in some aspects, but not to the point where I was like taken aback or that I didn't enjoy the book. But yeah, but let's dive right into it. So I'm going to talk about the things that I did like. I did like the fact that it was pretty different. I hadn't read a fantasy like this before, mainly because there are other elements there also. There's a lot of political elements in this novel, a lot of like royal aspects from it, a lot of kind of like the court life and stuff like that. So it's definitely not, just like your typical shimmering, magical kind of like fantasy book. There is a lot of like a kind of like a real life aspect to it. Obviously real life, not nowadays, because this is kind of takes place on the older days, of course, like in the Renaissance, or kind of like those older days. But it is pretty different from something that from other fantasies that I read, so that is definitely a good thing. Something else that I liked was that it was very fast paced. It was simply written, which I'm going to talk about later, and the things that I didn't like. It's not that the writing was bad, but I'm gonna get to that in a moment. But it was pretty, it was a good thing that I was pretty fast paced. So, it was like you could read it really quickly. It wasn't like a complicated read or anything like that. And something that I also liked is that it was pretty entertaining. it was very intriguing to see what was going to happen next. And, you know, like, the way that the characters kind of like changed and developed, especially the first character. This is a book written in the first person, which I usually don't really prefer, but you know, I didn't really mind it because I almost felt like it was a third person, and sometimes I kind of forgot that I was in a first person. Um, but I did like to see into the character's head and you know what she was thinking. There are some aspects about that that I didn't really like, but I'm gonna get to that in a moment. But other than that, yeah, I can just say that it was a pretty entertaining book. I don't know what else to say about the things that I liked. I did like there are some settings in the book that I did like. I would have preferred if they would have explored a little bit of it more. That's where she comes from, like the village and stuff like that. I would have liked to see more about that, you know, more of that. Um, but you know, I did like the feeling of the book. That's also something that you know, it was pretty, even though there were some things going on, it was always very, there was like sometimes an air of mystery, and of course there was a little bit of magic in there, not that much. But, I did quite enjoy like you know, like the feeling that the book gave you, and, it was just pretty entertaining. I don't really know what else to say, and, you know, the main character, I did like to see what she thought about some things and the way she was changing and stuff like that. And yeah, so it was a very interesting story and very intriguing and fairly entertaining. So yeah, that's what I liked about this book, that I could get out of my you know, out of the top of my head right now. So about the things that I didn't like, there were a couple. Um, First of all, I know that I've said this like in some of my other book reviews. The writing, while it was pretty simple and pretty straightforward, which is good if you're trying to read like a quicker paced book, for me, it just felt a little bit too modern. And I know I've said this a lot about maybe I should just stop reading this type of books and find something else. It's not that something that bothers me, you know. It's not something that I don't need it to be like super sophisticated like books or anything, because then it's too hard to understand. You know, I'm pretty okay with like pretty quick paced language, but sometimes it just felt like it almost felt like there were, you know, so this book takes place in like the past, you know, obviously like the older days in a fantasy world, of course, fantasy kingdom that doesn't exist. But it feels like, you know, the way that they talk and the way that they like express themselves, it feels as if they were from the modern day. And it's not that something that I was like very upset about, but you know, it's something that I kind of take, you know, and notice. So that I didn't like that much, but it wasn't something that made me really upset. Something else that I didn't like was the magical aspect of this book. You know, it was very minimum, which is okay, but it was just not done in the best way. Let's say that the magical aspect of this book and the magical characters, I feel like they weren't developed well enough, or they weren't created well enough. It felt too human for me, and I know that sounds very picky and very like, but they just felt too human for me. I didn't feel like they were too magical at all. Um, you know, and I did appreciate that dash of, you know, of magic in there, but, you know, that I just felt like it wasn't well done, you know, with the magical aspects and the magical characters. It just felt too human and kind of like superficial and just like not really enchanting or alluring anything. So that's kind of like a letdown, but it wasn't something that also like got me super upset, that just made me like, oh, you know. Something else that I didn't like sometimes was the characters. There were a lot of characters that were kind of like unlikable. The main character at moments was kind of unlikable. Then you know, there came moments when you did like her, but there came moments when, you know, when she was kind of obnoxious and kind of like, not likable. And there was quite some like hateful characters, but of course you have those in every book. But this is a pretty character-driven book. Some characters were more developed than others. But yeah, the main character was kind of like, like I said, I felt like she was like a modern day girl, There wasn't so much depth to her or to any character in that matter, to be honest. But it was still okay, It wasn't like, oh, this character, I absolutely hate her, or stuff like that. But the characters could have been maybe a little bit more interesting. But still, Another thing that I didn't like too much was the ending. I just felt like that ending was just maybe done that way to fulfill the tradition of this kind of book, but I didn't feel like it was the right ending to choose. I would have preferred the other alternate ending, which maybe if you've read this book or if you read it, you will see coming, like I would prefer if the main character would have chosen that instead of what she did. So that was kind of like a letdown and in a way, and kind of like, but like I said, it's not something either that that really like made me upset. So yeah, so that's that, and yeah, something else. Oops, sorry for shaking the camera. Something else was like the magical aspects, like I said, were very minimum. But something I did like, and I forgot to mention in my what I liked about this book talk. I did like the magic used in this book. It was kind of like bittersweet because of the magic that she did. Because like I said, she was like kind of like a apprentice, like her grandmother's apprentice in like witchcraft and herbology. So I did like that aspect and the way she knew about those things and the way the magic was presented. But in a way, sometimes it got a little bit like, kind of like a little bit, just not too much, but like the way she used it became a little bit annoying. But it was still interesting, It wasn't like the magic that you typically see, like with wizards and throwing lightning bulbs out of their hands and like spells and stuff like that. It wasn't like that. It was a more like intricate kind of like magical aspect. So that was pretty cool, even though sometimes I felt like the character kind of like was using them in a kind of like a weird way. But it was still pretty cool. Yeah, but that being said, about the things that I didn't like, that was kind of like pretty much like the things that I could think of right now. The things that kind of like stood up to me. Like I said, there is more of a political aspect about this book, which I usually am not into. But she was able to make it interesting and to make it intriguing, so that I appreciate. And yeah, and something else that I kind of didn't like, I was expecting this book to be more. And I think I've said this in a couple of other book reviews too, but maybe it's just the type of books that I've picked or something like that. I was expecting this book to have a more serious tone to it. And I love lighthearted books. It's not that this book was super lighthearted. There were lighthearted moments and there were dark moments. But I thought this book was going to be more mature in an aspect. Not that there were like adult scenes or anything like that. Or that, those elements or anything like that. But I just felt that I thought it was going to be a little bit more, I don't know, because of the more sophisticated. Maybe that's the right word. A little bit more sophisticated. One of those fantasies that just make you go like, wow, like, like, wow, that's pretty like, no, the story is original, but I mean like, one of those fantasies that just make an impression on you. And, it's not just that the story is good, but there's like kind of like this sophisticated, more mature, more, I don't know, more developed kind of like air to it, But this book felt pretty juvenile for me. It felt pretty young adult. And, that's, it's okay. That it's not that that's something bad. Of course, that depends on your opinion. But for me, yeah, it felt a tad too juvenile for my liking, and especially with some character. And I do like some juvenile books, but I don't know, maybe it's not what I was expecting from it. I was expecting for something more sophisticated and a little bit more mature in that aspect. But, but it was okay. It's not something that also made me really upset and that I was like super disappointed. So, but I was slightly disappointed because I was expecting other things of this book, but it was still a very enjoyable read. It was a pretty fun read, and I'm glad I read it. It kept me really entertained, and it was interesting. There was a good amount of mystery in there, and a good amount of like, oh, like that's interesting. And something else that I didn't like that I forgot to mention was the fact that when I started reading this book, and even until the end, I felt like I didn't know what direction it was taking. Like, when I started reading it, I was like, this is kind of random, and I kind of felt like that in throughout the whole book. Maybe it's because it feels kind of like it's not written like a journal or anything like that, but I just didn't know there wasn't like a problem, like a specific problem to follow, and I guess that in a way is like kind of good because it keeps you like interested, and you're like, oh, I wonder what's gonna happen. But since the beginning of the book, I didn't know what was like happening, what was like developing, because things just like came like randomly in a way. That's why I said that it felt kind of like a journal, because like there wasn't like a something that you saw happening since the beginning, or since some points of the book. Of course, there were elements here and there that like kind of like hinted things, but it wasn't the type of book that just gave you like I said, when I was reading it, I didn't know kind of like where it was going. I was like, like, okay, like, this is kind of random, and then, other things happen. So there wasn't like a specific, like very concrete kind of like, dilemma or something like that. So that depends if it's a good thing or a bad thing. It was a good thing in some aspects, and it was kind of like not a bad thing, but kind of like a meh thing in some aspects, because, sometimes I just felt like I was like, okay, like, this is kind of like, I don't know what's gonna go on now, and this book doesn't really follow like a line. But I mean, that depends, of course, like I said. But yeah, but still, I enjoyed this book. It was pretty entertaining. So I'm happy with it. It was pretty good. Is it one of the best books that I've ever read, or one of my favorite fantasies? Absolutely not. But it's pretty good. So who would I recommend this to? If you're looking for a different kind of fantasy, or a fantasy that is not that much fantastical, because it does count like a fantasy. It's not a historical, because it doesn't really take place on like a real place. Um, but there are magical elements, but it's not like super strong. So if you're looking for a fantasy that's just settled on fantasy aspects and has a more political aspect to it, and a more like court life kind of aspect, and more like government, or royalty kind of aspect and stuff like that, then you like this one. But if you're expecting like a super magical, whimsical, or very ethereal, or whatever, maybe as I was expecting a little bit, then this is definitely going to disappoint you a little bit. I'm not saying that you shouldn't read it, but it's definitely not going to be that way. There's definitely much more political and royalty aspect in this book. So if you're into that, then you'll enjoy this book. And if you're into just like an interesting, pretty quick pace, simple fantasy, and if you don't mind more of a modern kind of language and a more YA, more youth kind of feel to it, then go for it, So yeah, that's the people who I would recommend it to. So who would I not recommend it to? If you don't like, but then again, I don't like political aspects in my books, barely, and I did enjoy it. So, but if you're more into like very whimsical, magical books that have like a lot of, well, magic and creatures and adventures and stuff like that, or more epic fantasy, then you won't like this. But if you don't mind like more royalty based, more less magical kind of books, and more like character and plot driven kind of book that are more like personal, because it is in a first person, and more of that, and it touches other themes, like I said, like royalty and treason and all those things, and kind of like that court life and all that, then you will like this one. But if you're not into that, then you won't like that. You kind of will find this book a little bit dull. So, if you're expecting magic and shimmering lights of this book, then you will like it. But if you are okay with, like more of a YA, kind of like quick read that's fantasy but not really that much so, then I would suggest that you give this book a try. If you're pretty open-minded, then give this book a try if you ever see it. If you're like, oh, if it interests you, um, it's okay. It depends on what you're looking for, but it's all right. Like I said, didn't make me go crazy, but it was fine. So, what would I give this book? I would give it probably a 3.5-ish out of 5. Because like I said, I did enjoy it. It was interesting. It didn't make me bored or anything. But there were things in there that could have been done much better, and things that I feel like there was room for improvement for. And maybe I'm just not into. I was into it, but maybe this is more like a different style. But it was good. It was good. Anyways, and it was pretty enjoyable. So 3.5, 3.7 out of 5, I think, would be my rating for this book. So, Summers at Castle Auburn by Sharon Shinn. So, have you guys read this book? Have you guys heard about it? Are you guys considered to read it? If you have read it, what do you think about this book? Do you agree with the things that I said? Do you disagree? What things that you like the most? What things you didn't dislike? What do you think about it? Let's talk about this book in the descriptions, in the comments. Let me know if you were planning to read it, if you've ever heard about it, all those things. Let's talk about this book in the comment section, and yeah, let's just get discussing, and let's get talking. So anyways, that being said, thank you guys so much for tuning in to my review. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you want to see more of these reviews and really, really nice books, you're more than welcome to embark on this fantasy journey with me. So be sure that you hit the subscribe button. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys in the next review. Thank you for watching, and read on. Bye-bye.